Welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page. Varietal Literature is a group of writers from Vancouver who just enjoy things to do with narrative. We do a variety of things on this channel, hence the name, but what we do on Tuesday nights, keeping with Fairy Tale Tuesdays, is we read about folktales and fairy tales. And the story that we're going to read tonight is a bit of an extension on what we were doing last week, which is we are talking about dwarven folk in folklore. This week, though, well, last week was all German folklore. This week is all Norwegian. In fact, it is one Norwegian story. It's specifically The Princess Who Went to the Heart of the Earth. And I'll say a little bit more on it in a moment, but if you are new here, consider subscribing if you do enjoy the content, by the way. Maybe not everything will be your cup of tea, but that'll keep you up to date on what I'm doing. But more than that, down in the description below, there will be little timestamps if you're not watching this live. And that will allow you to jump ahead to the beginning of the story, or if we end up having time, I do have a second story we might do. But I don't think we're going to have time for it. This is going to be one of those one story streams, because this is quite the journey, the story that we're going to go into. Yeah, you can click those timestamps if you want. Now, moving on to the story of the evening. GS says, beautiful background images. Well, thank you. Moving on to the stories of the evening. We were talking last week about how the characterization of dwarves in folklore is really diverse. But we came to focus a bit on something that was absent in old stories of folklore about dwarves that seems to be really prevalent in the last 100 years of a representation of dwarves, or 125, 150 years. And that is the idea that they're sort of greedy and underhanded. Now, I won't redo that whole speech here. If you're interested in that, watch the video of last week in our Fireside Fairytales playlist, which that specific video is called Dwarves Before Tolkien. And I think I do as good a job as I was ever going to do trying to describe it there. But the short version is that dwarves don't necessarily look the way we expect them to look. And so the story we're going to talk about tonight doesn't center itself on dwarves, but involves meeting some dwarves. And the story itself is quite good, which is the main reason I chose it. But I also chose it because it gives us a representation of how Norwegian folklore looked at dwarves. Now, something worth adding here, it arguably, the source for modern conception of dwarves comes from Norwegian, or really Nordic, folklore. It comes from things like the Prose Edda. But, interestingly enough, despite the fact that that's kind of where a lot of it comes from, it doesn't figure very much into Norwegian folklore. Dwarves are not a major figure in it. They come up here and there. We are going to see what is a major figure in a lot of folklore from Norway, and that is Halda. And you'll see those when you get those, but I will, by the way, link, not right now because I can't do it before the video is done, but I will pin a comment below that has the info on the translator of this, Simon Roy Hughes. But I'm also going to pin in there, if I don't forget, a article he wrote that describes these rather sort of strange and unique spiritual forest spirit kind of people called a Halda that we're going to see in here, and in the sort of like amorphous way they represent them or come up in folklore. So we're going to see actually a few different groups of magical beings. Two of them defined, one of them undefined. I don't know what it is. And yeah, I don't think I need to say more than that. If you are here live and you want to ask a question in chat or make a comment in chat, there's a live chat. Join right in. And as long as you're not a horrible, monstrous jerk, I will probably respond. Okay. So let me take the music down just a little bit. because as you know, we like to do a little bit of sound effects in this. So our story opens in a castle. So let's get a little castle ambiance going. And let's abide no more wasted time. So tonight's story is The Princess Who Went to the Heart of the Earth. And it's a story that is written by Regine Normann, who is a writer who hasn't been widely translated, but Simon Roy Hughes has been a big sort of promoter of. Simon Roy Hughes is, Regine Normann is an older writer from the 19th century, but Simon Roy Hughes is a contemporary of us, still living, and he translates old Norwegian folklore, primarily from Asbjornsen and Moe, but also other writers like Regine Normann that he thinks deserve to be in English. And Regine Normann is telling tales that she has heard when she was a child from travelers who came by her parents' place. But she tells them in her own way. So it's both folklore, a fairy tale, this more so is a fairy tale, but it also is written in that cohesive way that you get with single author tales. And regular viewers of the show will know what I mean, and non-regular viewers, don't worry about it. Just enjoy the story, really. So this is called The Princess Who Went to the Heart of the Earth. And it was translated by Simon Roy Hughes, who has a Patreon that you can visit in the pinned comment below if we are not live when you are watching this. And you absolutely should support his excellent work in translating the classics of Asbjornsen and Moe. There was once upon a time a king who was so rich and powerful that his like was not to be found in the whole wide world. His queen was dead, though, and he had no sons. But he did have a daughter whom he loved more than the apple of his eye. But the years passed, and old age announced its arrival. The king was not as supple and easygoing as before. His hair and his beard began to gray. Then a great dismay came upon him, and even the memory of his lust for life was as if blown away by the wind. The whole court dressed in black, and the princess, who'd always been cheerful and playful and had to everyone's joy fluttered around like any other butterfly, grew quiet and then forgot to laugh. All day she crept around on tiptoe, and all evening she sat with her hand on her cheek, tasting nothing wet or dry, for so sat her father the king. Now, there was a day on in which some friends came to visit the princess. And the king was not at home, so the princess received her visitor folk well. A great feast was made ready, and they ate and drank and laughed and made merry, so that it was a pleasure to watch and to listen to. And the king's daughter plain forgot that her duty was to share her father's dismay at his old age, which comes far too quickly upon us humans. And when their merrymaking was at their merriest, the king returned. Is this "The way you partake of your father's great sorrow," he said. "I am hardly out of the house before you fill it with laughter and merriment, so that it may be heard from a great distance, and I am ashamed of the child I have brought up myself." The princess threw herself on her knees before the king, grasped his right hand between both of hers, and laid her cheek to it. "Forgive me, father. I shall never do so again," she said, sobbing and weeping. But the king wrested his hand free. "I will not be your father, and you may not be my daughter," he said. And then he chased the princess out of the castle and locked the door behind her himself. And he forbade his courtiers to let her in if she came knocking. Which, by the way, seems a little extreme. She's just a young girl. Well, outside it was dark and icy cold. And there stood the unfortunate princess, dressed in lace and muslin, with small party shoes on her feet. She had no one to seek shelter with now that her own father did not want anything to do with her, and she wished to die where she stood. I do think, though, she's a princess. She must have had someone. Then a hand touched her lightly on her bare shoulder, and a blue-dressed boy stood beside her. With a lighted lantern in his other hand. "I am to greet you from my mother, the Halder Queen, and ask if you would give the pleasure of staying with her tonight," he said. "Is it far to go?" asked the princess. "Just around the corner, a few paces more, and we are there," said the blue boy, taking her by her hand and leading her along the castle wall. And there they stood, just a few paces from the castle. Lighted lanterns were everywhere, and on each side of the front door great pitch torches cast a light upon the wall of the house and upon the leaves of the trees in the garden. "That house does not stand there during the day," cried the princess, wondering greatly at what she saw with her own eyes, not being able to take it in or understand. "Oh yes, it does stand there, and we are there, and we see you, but you do not see us," said the boy, and as he went with her past the guard, up the stairs and into the hall. On the high seat there sat the Halder Queen. She had a golden crown upon her head, and her dress was bluer than the bluest blue of the sky, and covered in golden stars. The boy let go of the princess's hand, and she instinctively curtsied deeply before the queen. "Come and sit down here on my footstool. Tell me why you cry so that I can hear you all the way in here," said the Halder Queen. "I have insulted my father, the king, with my thoughtless levity, and he will not be my father, and I may not be his child, and he's chased me out of the castle and said that I may never come back to him," the princess replied, resting her head on the queen's knee. Seems forward. She is a queen. The Halder queen gently stroked her hair and desired one of her maids to fetch a strengthening draught, for the princess shivered, her teeth chattering. So downcast was she. As a little note here, strengthening drafts is a thing in Norwegian folklore, probably in others as well, but I've seen it a few times. It is essentially magical brew, usually a beer or an ale, that when you drink gives you strength. To what extent that strength manifests, whether in her case health, or in the case of the boy who comes and beheads all the trolls that we read before, the strength to behead the many heads of a troll. And when the draught had taken effect, the Halder Queen said, "I was friends with your mother, and she often brought you into the hall to me. And when she lay on her deathbed, she asked me to remember our friendship and hold a protecting hand over you if ever you were in distress or in need of help from one who stood so close to her. And now here you are in distress, and I can help you. But it all depends on whether you have the courage to do as I say." Just try me," said the princess. "There's nothing so difficult or daunting that I will not do it, so long as I can become good friends with my father again." Honey, you can do better than that, man. "By the heart of the earth grows a flower," said the queen. "Within it is red like blood, and without it is yellow like the sunshine. This flower you shall pluck and boil tea with, and give it to the king to drink. And then his sorrow will leave him, and he will become glad and content with his life, and take you as his child again." The princess jumped up from the footstool. "Where's the heart of the earth? Can I go there right now, immediately?" she asked, ready to set off her way on to the flower. "Now wait a little," said the Halder Queen. "First you must go down to the subterraneans and make friends with them. Thereafter shall go through the realms of the dwarves. After that you shall go through fire and water. And then you shall come to the gleaming mountain, and in the mountain lies the heart of the earth. And you shall know it by its beating, for it beats in time with your own." The Halder Queen then took a small gold ring from the little finger of her left hand and gave it to her. "Look here, take it, and if you are ever confounded about the way you should choose, then look down through the ring. And should you ever be in such distress that you do not know how to free yourself, then think of me and break the ring in two." The princess thanked her, strung the ring onto her necklace, and then bade farewell. The blue boy took the lantern and opened a hatch in the floor, and went before her down a steep staircase of more than 100 steps. Finally, they came to a door, which the boy opened. "Farther than this, I may not go with you," he said, shoving her bodily through the door, and he locked it closed behind her. It's the second time someone shoved this princess, by the way. There stood the princess, cut off from the world and the people up on earth. Before her lay a beautiful village with large farms, lush fields, and meadows. Around a long, narrow water, there were herds of well-fed livestock. Both sheep and goats and cows and horses grazed on green meadows. Tall and forested mountains surrounded the village on all sides. The sun was high in the sky. It was daylight as up on the earth, and smoke rose from the chimneys all over the village. But of the folk there was no sign. Uncertain, the princess stood considering which farm she should choose, but then she remembered the queen. The ring, and what the Hulder Queen had said. So she took it and held it before her right eye. And far away she glimpsed the roof of a red house among blossoming apple trees. And a narrow footpath threaded its way across the meadow to the house, and so she chose this. When she reached the place where all the cattle were grazing, she heard a pathetic lowing from a coal-black bull that stood with one foreleg pressed flat in a split in an old tree stump. And the princess ran over to it and heaved and twisted and wrestled until she freed the leg of that old bull. "Now that you have helped me in my great distress, I will give you some good advice in thanks for what you've done for me," said the bull. "When you come to the farm you are on your way to, the woman will receive you and invite you to sit and eat with them. You may freely eat all the food, so long as you take care not to come close to the blue spot that is in the midst of all they set before you." In general, avoid the blue spots in food, people. "For if you eat that which is marked with it, you will become a subterranean and forget your father and the flower you are out to fetch." One of my favorite tropes in these style of stories is just how everyone happens to know what you're up to. "How kind of you for warning me before it is too late," said the princess, stroking the bowl on its jowls before hurrying on. As she hurried on her way, she saw a beautiful butterfly that was caught by its wing in a spider's web spun between the flowers of the meadow. "Oh, wait a little, do not move. I shall come to help you," called the princess, stepping over to it, and she carefully loosed its wing from the web. "Now you have loosed me from death," said the butterfly. "I shall repay you with good advice. When you come to the farm that you are on your way to, and the woman has given you food, she will lay forth 3 dresses, one a beautiful blue, one patterned like my wings, and one a drab gray. Do not take the blue one, for then you will be forced to return whence you came. Do not take the patterned one, for then you will become a subterranean and must marry her son. But take the gray one, for in that dress you may walk safely in the realm of the dwarves." "Well, how kind you are to tell me this beforehand," said the princess, and she set the butterfly down upon a dog rose bush. When she had gone a little farther, a robin darted by her head, chased by a hawk. Chasing it as prey. Now you have saved me from death." I think I missed a line there, sorry. The princess waved at the hawk so that it was frightened off. Chasing its prey. "Now you have saved me from death," said the robin. "As repayment you shall have the straw I carry in my beak. But when you stand before the realm of the dwarves, no one will let you in. Then you must stick this straw into the keyhole, and the gates will open by themselves." "You dear little bird, however shall I thank you enough for the gift you've given me?" said the princess, kissing the robin on its beak. And she went on until she came to the house among the apple trees that she'd spied in the Halder Queen's ring. It was painted red, with white window frames and white shutters, and on the stair lay a snow-white cat, lazy and licking itself. It glanced at her from beneath half-closed eyelids as the princess passed. In the kitchen, a stunted woman was carrying out dinner for her folk. Already seated at the table, and to the princess's eye they looked to be good, kind folk. But their facial features showed that they were aged, and the skin of every one of them was wrinkled. Jess asked, "Oh dear, what is a subterranean?" That's a subterranean. That's about all you're going to get. She greeted, "Good day," and blessed the food and remained standing on the threshold like a pauper. "You may take a seat if you please. Take some food with us," said the woman, making a place for her, the princess, on the bench beside the one who wanted to appear young. The princess did not need to be asked twice. She had not tasted food since the unhappy feast. That was the reason she now walked homeless in this strange underworld. Her bowels screamed with hunger. How's that for a turn of phrase? Say that the next time someone asks you if you're hungry. My bowels scream with hunger. They had upon the table cured meats and flatbread and whole grain milk gruel for dinner. And the woman gave the princess a lot of meat and bread on her platter, and every slice of meat, every piece of flatbread, as she had been warned, had a blue patch in the middle, and the gruel all the same. So the princess cut off and broke around the blue, ate of the gruel where she dared without coming too close to the blue, and thanked her for the food. When the folk had gone out, the woman asked her what her errand was. I'm going to the heart of the earth to cure my father, she replied, for that was her penance. For what? When she had her piece, the woman opened a corner cupboard and took out 3 dresses. One was a beautiful blue. One was patterned like a butterfly's wing. And the third was a drab gray. And the woman asked her to choose a dress for the princess's journey. For what she had on, well, that would not do for climbing and cleaving stone and scree in the realm of the dwarves. So the princess laid her hand on the gray. If I am to wear any dress other than what I'm wearing, then it shall be this one, she said. Oh, well, now you've chosen wisely, though not according to my heart. I wanted you to be tempted by the patterned one, for then I would have been able to keep you, and you would have married my son. I mean, who doesn't want to get rid of their son to somebody else? Still living at home, said the woman, helping to put the dress on. Then the woman went with her until they came to a steep wall of rock. And there was no sign of a door to see. But there was a tiny opening, as big as a keyhole in the mountain, at about the height of a man from the ground where they stood. I must leave you here, said the woman, but if you pass my house on your return, then look in, so I may hear how things have gone with you, and whether you have managed to fetch the flower. And then she bade farewell and wandered back across the meadow. The princess took the straw the robin had given her, stretched herself as far up as she could, and stuck it in the hole in the wall of the rock, and immediately a gate opened with a bang, and the princess stared into a huge cavern with no daylight and no sunshine, and a cold pardon me. And a cold gust blew against her as she went into the mountain, and the gates closed behind her. And she stood in the pitch darkness. Then she took the ring the Halder Queen had given her and squeezed it to her eye and stared. And when she stared a while, she glimpsed a narrow, almost impassable path alongside an open abyss. She had no choice. If she wanted to go forward, she would have to follow it. And bravely, she began to walk alongside an endless abyss. First, she walked on two legs, proud and brave. But not long, she started to crawl on all fours, clawing herself fast to the rock by her fingers and toes, and more than once she was tempted to break the ring asunder and summon the Halder Queen to help, for she was so terrified. But she was brave, so she did not do so. And tirelessly she struggled forward through the clammy darkness and the desolation, and at greater than great length she heard the reverberation of hammer strokes, and her eye caught sight of torches far away in the mountain. She headed for the light of one of them and came to a small homunculus with an ice-gray beard and red-rimmed eyes. He was hacking loose, rough silver nuggets from the rock wall and gave himself little time to answer when she greeted him and blessed his work. Can you tell me where I should go to get the heart of the earth? The princess asked.
Wow! You must ask that of the king. He's in the great hall, the dwarf barked,
Hued and hacked again so that the silver nuggets flew about her. Well, the king sat in an armchair hewn from a single huge gold nugget, and around him swarmed dwarves who emptied huge sacks of gold and precious stones into open chests and vessels. It glittered and sparkled and burned in rapid flashes from the walls and ceilings wherever she turned, and the glare, so substantial was it, it hurt her eyes.
Come hither, child of man. Who unbidden has entered the realm of the dwarves? And tell me what you want in here,
cried the king. Well, the dwarves made room for her so that she could approach, and she bowed deferentially and greeted the king of the dwarves in the manner that kings upon the earth should be greeted. I come, great king, to ask the way to the heart of the earth. The king my father is wholly downcast with dismay that life on earth lasts far too short a time, and I'm going there to pluck a healing herb that can make him glad again.
And who was it who, without my leave, opened the mountain to you?
Asked the king. This little straw that I hold in my hand did so. A robin gave it to me. If you want it, then you may have it, she said, laying the straw in his hand. And the dwarf king was glad.
Because you have done this, and with good will have given me the straw that opens all the hidden treasures of this mountain, I shall give you a shawl that fire will not bite, which you can wear when you go through the flames.
And he rose from his chair in the golden nugget and went with her down through the mountain until they saw the strong glare of flaming fire. Ooh. Round about them there was the unceasing hammering and banging of the dwarves, breaking loose those precious stones and ores. And the silver and the gold that was emptied into the treasure source sang and sang.
Wrap the shawl around you now from the head to foot, said the dwarf king. And when she had done so, he shoved her into the sea of fire.
Again, getting shoved. And the fire roared and burned. But the shawl was as ice. And she was glad when she came out of the fire, for had it been much longer, then she might have caught a chill. And so she cast the shawl off and stood a while warming herself and listening to the sound of all the waters she now had to cross. Glossy and black, they bubbled and flowed past where she stood and down a terrible drain. There was no bridge, there was no boat. Helplessly, the princess threw herself down on the narrow strip of land between the fire and the water and began to weep. And while she lay there, forsaken by all, an energy flowed into her breast from the earth, and she felt it. The beating of a heart that beat together with her own. She was not alone. And she rose strengthened. Taking the ring and peering through it, far away by the steep bank. Noticing now there lay a small boat in the lee of some rocks. She loosed it, sat herself in the boat, and let it drift down the drain. What more happened, she did not know. For when she regained her senses, the boat was rocking gently. Close by, a sky-high mountain that was as clear as the clearest glass. Out from the mountain shone a light stronger than the clearest sunshine, and of more glorious than innumerable rainbows, and the beating of the heart of the earth that lay there, resonated in the silence. Solemnly. Sorry, I just realized I was playing the wrong song. She stepped out of the boat and went on into the mountain, to the heart that lay beating there, beating incessantly. And round about it grew the flowers she'd gone there to pluck. And when she came out again, the boat had disappeared. She looked for it through the ring, but there was nowhere to be seen, and the mountain stood surrounded by water in the midst of an endless expanse of sea. And so she cried within her for the Halder Queen, and finally broke the ring. And immediately the blue boy stood there. "You need not be afraid of not returning home to your father," he said. "Crawl into this falcon skin that I have with me. It is big enough to fit us both." And the princess did as he said, and the boy fastened the skin around them, and together they flew up towards God's clear sunshine. Now, back at home, the king sat on the beach, and he was brooding and mourning, and asked the birds and the fishes and the foaming waves if they'd seen anything of his daughter, whom he'd so heartlessly chased away from her home. And then a falcon flew and swooped down through the blue sky, diving and landing upon the beach at his side. And out of its skin came the princess and the blue boy. It's got to have a psychic impact on you, doesn't it? I have been to the heart of the earth and plucked a healing herb for you. And now you must let me go in and boil tea from it. And when you drink the tea, you will become young at heart and glad of life, exactly as you were before old age came and cast its dismay over you. And things went just as the Halder Queen had said, which is super rare, by the way, in fairy tales. As soon as the king had drunk the tea, he regained his lust for life. And there was no end of his gratitude to his daughter who'd fetched the herb. But the princess was sullen where she went. She would neither eat nor drink. She thought only of the blue boy, and that life had no meaning without him. And one day she met him in the garden and asked him what she should do so they could always be together. You shall cut your little finger and drip 3 drops of blood on my forehead, and then I shall become a visible person like you. And the princess, she made no hesitation. She did exactly what he said. And then they went to the king, and there was not a no in his mouth when they said that they would have each other. There was brewing and baking, and the castle resounded with joy. And song on the day the princess stood as the blue boy's bride. And snip, snap, snout, this tale's told out. And that is the very end of the story. The Princess Who Went to the Heart of the Earth. Written by Regine Normann, or at least told by Regine Normann, and translated by Simon Roy Hughes, who again you can support by following the link in the pinned comment. If you are, if you like the stream, you know, it always helps to give a like. It's a simple click that lets me know this is something I should do again. And you know, these longer form ones are a little bit of a risk. People tend to not want to sit still for a full hour. But yeah, give it a like. It'll let me know that this is something worth doing again for you. Because that's the main thing I want to do, is tell stories you want to hear. Yeah, thank you to Simon Roy Hughes. He was the one who recommended this, by the way. I was looking around his blog, which I'll link below, for stories about dwarves, and I was sort of coming up a little shy. I did find some other ones, but we're not going to get to those today. And yeah, he recommended this. Regine Normann has yet to let me down. So she was the one who did the companion, that I believe. Now that I'm second guessing myself, but I'm pretty sure she did the companion, which we did a couple of weeks ago. It is one of the best performing videos I've done. So obviously people like it. GS said great voices and sound effects, Rory. Well, thank you. There was an unfortunate pause there. I accidentally closed a tab I shouldn't have. So I appreciate people's patience with that. You know, obviously this is live. If you enjoyed this, yeah, consider subscribing. And if you really enjoy this, if this is like a highlight of your week or something like that, and you want to know how you can give back, you can buy me a coffee, which there's a link in the description below for that. There's 2 options. It doesn't really matter to me. And I appreciate it if you're able to do that. You don't have to do that. The main thing I want to do is tell people stories, but we do have costs here. So if you ever find yourself able, it's helpful. Those who do are able to buy me little coffees. You don't actually buy me a coffee. You buy me hosting fees and repairs to my studio lights and things like that. GS said the dwarfs were helpful in this tale. Yes. Notice once again, here's a distinction building on last week, right? So last week I made the point that, you know, there was bad stereotypes that got stitched to dwarves by really pretty specific people who were intending to do that in the late 19th century. And And it kind of gets picked up in the 20th century, even by people who probably don't agree with it in principle. They still pick up these things. And the main thing is that they're greedy. And it's interesting to me when I read these tales, whether you're going all the way back to the saga or this tale, even when they have a lot of gold and silver around, they're never particularly greedy about it. They're always pretty helpful. And I think the reason why that's worth highlighting is I think you can see the contrast in history of how dwarves and little hill folk used to be regarded and how they get regarded after a pretty specific attempt to attach them to bad things. So yeah, I mean, really the overwhelming message of that, by the way, I did feel like I didn't make this clear last week, is not that dwarves are racist. That's not my point. My point is that dwarves were diverse and then got associated to something that they didn't have to be associated to. And now there's a monolithic understanding of dwarves that just was never really there in history prior. And I think it's a reminder of, like, especially if you're a writer, consider where you're getting your understanding of old lore, folklore creatures from, because some of them are pretty tainted supplies. They're not really how that countryside talked about that creature. It's how a particular collector or reteller has chosen to frame it. Which is why, you know, shows like this and translators are really important, because you get a lot of the stuff I'm reading, not so much today because there was a single source, but a lot of stuff I'm reading is stuff collected from towns in the countryside in like the 16th century, 17th century, 15th century. Like, it's raw how people understood things back then. GS says, be kind to Dwarfs Week, St. Patrick's Day next week. Now, leprechauns, on the other hand, are always jerks. There is no mixture in the sources about leprechauns. They can be a lot of fun, but usually their fun involves like kidnapping people or killing people or getting you too drunk because they think it's funny or ruining parties. They're chaos. Well, anyways, I'll keep the fire warm. You guys have a good sleep. I've been Rory. This is Varietal Literature. Thank you so much, GS, for keeping me company and everybody else out there lurking. Have a good sleep.